If you were there at that time, it was just a magnificent time to start a landscape business. So they're stuck in their house looking out the window at their landscape that hasn't been touched in probably 5 or 10 years, and they're thinking, I can take this stimulus money and renovate my landscape. And I know for me, when I started, before I went out on my own, I was getting leads off of Nextdoor. It was a great spot where people were just looking for a local person that wasn't necessarily a business, somebody that could just, that they know they're going to get a better deal just dealing with a guy that doesn't have all the overhead that a business has. And
you're listening to Landscape Business Growth Lab podcast. I'm your host, Ron McCabe, founder of Everbearing Services. On this podcast, I uncover the landscaping and outdoor living industry's best kept secrets. You'll hear exclusive interviews with industry innovators, discover cutting-edge strategies from the fastest-growing businesses in the green space. We're also going to explore game-changing technologies that are at the tip of the shears. This is where seasoned landscapers and those who are just breaking ground in the industry grow together. Let's roll out the green carpet. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to the Landscape Business Growth Lab. I'm your host, Ron McCabe. Today, I'm sitting down with Mike Rhine of the TurfGuy out of Kokomo, Indiana. Mike went from golf course superintendent to starting his own business at the start of COVID, and in 5 years, he's built it to $250,000 in revenue. Today, he's breaking down exactly how he got there. Let's get into it. Mike, you've got years in the turf industry, you run the TurfGuy, and you've built this thing largely on your own terms. But before all of that, you were a kid who just loved golf. Take us back to where this whole thing started.
Right, so I was into golf growing up. I had numerous golf lessons growing up as a kid and just was around the golf course quite a bit. And as I got my license and we had a membership at the local golf course, I started working around the pro shop, washing carts and, helping with junior golf and doing those kinds of things. Golf course was getting ready to do a bunker renovation project, and I went to work out on the maintenance crew, and that turned into years on the golf course. And the superintendent there encouraged me to look into going to turf school, and originally I wanted to be a golf pro, so I had been looking at going to one of the golf course management programs, but they were pretty particular about their admittance, so I wasn't quite a good enough golfer and I didn't carry quite the GPA that I needed, so off to turf school it was.
Okay. So did you know what you're getting into when you started out there or?
I was a country kid. I grew up on a farm. None of it was surprising to me, so I had a pretty good idea what I was getting into. But I just enjoyed that environment, and it was kind of a closer knit group of guys that you can hang around with and shop talk and all those kind of things. Whereas on the golf course, on the pro shop side, it was largely just me and my brother washing carts and not really hanging out with anybody. We might get to go out on the putting green or driving range while things were slow, but that was about the extent of any kind of socializing.
Cool. How was turf school?
So I spent 2 years at IUK, which was they didn't offer a turf program. I was in accounting with the intention of going out to a golf course management program that would have led me to the golf pro side of things. And that's why I realized that didn't make the requirements for getting into that school. I transferred to Purdue to their turf management program after talking to the superintendent I was working for. It's a broad range of soil sciences and plant sciences, and it's hard to imagine. Most people can't even imagine studying soil and how it works, but that's what we did in turf school. So,
well, it's important. And so you really got kind of a solid foundation in turf school.
You don't learn the business side of things, but you definitely learn all the horticultural and agronomic practices that are going to be widely applicable to plant sciences in general.
Did that help you as you transitioned into landscaping?
Yeah, for sure. You understand that some plants like shade and some plants like full sun and some plants like wet soils and some plants like dry soils, and so those are things that are not a surprise to you, and then you get to kind of use and understand that. Then you understand how to amend soils, what the things you might need to be testing for, pH, CC. It's just a long list of things that you learn in any school. School's not really about necessarily what you learn at school too. It's a lot of just about accepting that you have to learn things, you have to adapt, you continue to grow and see the world differently just by expanding your horizons. So it's kind of how I think of
Well, a
it.
lot of it's about learning how to learn, right?
Yep, exactly. That's what school is really more about. Some of it's vocational training, but a lot of it's just opening your mind and learning how to absorb information and try to just improve yourself and your thought process.
Exactly. So you spent a decade as a golf course superintendent and you kind of watch your salary go backwards relative to inflation. At what point did you look around and say, this isn't going to work?
Yeah, I'm so about I think about 7 or 8 years into it. I The golf course was struggling financially, and they come to us and said, "Hey, we're struggling. We're gonna have to get rid of your insurance." So then that was it was a big hit. There wasn't a really a pay
Right.
there wasn't a pay increase to offset any of it. So I was, right then I already knew the writing was kind of on the wall, but there's not really a lot of movement in the golf industry. A lot of times you get locked into where you're at, and in one small town, which I was in a small market, there were 3 golf courses, 4 golf courses in my county. Most of those, we were probably financially as well off as most of them. The country club would probably have been the only one that was paying too much more than what I was already making. It's just hard. These small market golf courses are really struggling to make ends meet, and I can't really explain why, other than a lot of those are not necessarily ran by business people. They try to keep prices low, which I understand. Everybody wants to appease as many people as possible. You want as many people to be able to come enjoy your product, but at the end of the day, you also have to keep the doors open.
Right. Absolutely. So the world changed, COVID happened. You went out on your own at the start of COVID, which sounds terrifying on the surface. Why did that moment actually work in your favor?
So those of us that kind of worked in the green space probably realized this if you were there at that time, that it was just a magnificent time to start a landscape business. And I think a lot of probably true for a lot of other businesses as well. Number one, you got some stimulus money, so you could use that to invest in equipment that you might need. Other people had a little bit of spending money they wouldn't otherwise have, and they're stuck in their house. So they're stuck in their house looking out the window at their landscape that hasn't been touched in probably 5 or 10 years, and they're thinking, I can take this stimulus money and renovate my landscape.
Right.
Assuming that they didn't need that money to pay bills or whatever because they were out of work, but
Right.
a lot of people that's what they spent it on. So it was great for us and constant work. And then there was so much work that it allowed me time to figure out the process of how to price things and what do I need to think about in every job. Like, how many steps are there to every job that you go out and do? Between you got to go meet the client, you got to write up a proposal, you got to maybe do a design, you got to how many trips back and forth are you going to make once you're actually there on site to haul materials back and forth, and try to come up with some way of quantifying each one of those steps and then put it into a format to bid. And luckily, I'd started a little before that, just doing small side jobs, so I kind of had gotten my feet wet doing odd jobs, which great way to start. Just go out and trim somebody's bushes and make sure you're measuring how long it takes and how many bushes they have, and you can quickly get your bearings on how long it's going to take you to do any particular job. So yeah, it was definitely a great learning experience, and without that, I don't know that I would have ever jumped out on my own. I like to think I would have eventually, but with just doing side jobs, I probably would have had enough money to risk it. But yeah, that definitely helped push me over the edge.
So yeah, COVID, it kind of gave you a buffer, and it was a, kind of an environment where you could afford to make some mistakes just starting out.
Right. And plus, when you start out, your overhead's low. If you have a partner whose income can sustain you, the risk, you don't risk ruin. So, I mean, that's always wasn't kind of a deciding factor as well for me. It was I had finally met a partner that could was there and could be there financially and was 100% invested in us going out and me doing this. And she didn't like my other job because I had to drive an hour away, and the money was okay, but it wasn't great. So she had encouraged me. She pulled money out of her 401k, and she was all on board. And then COVID happened, and she was laid off. So she was out there with me, pushing wheelbarrows around, digging holes, and involved in getting customers and talking with people, meeting people. We were off to the races right from day one.
So yeah, so Danielle jumped in that first COVID year with zero experience, and she kind of worked outside, pushed wheelbarrows, and digged holes. What does that say about who she is, and how has her role changed as you've grown?
Yeah, so she's a worker. Like she's an amazing partner. I mean, you couldn't possibly ask for somebody more supportive in everything I do. It takes a lot for somebody that literally she was a city kid. She didn't grow up with, she didn't know anything about plants or her was just kind of like foreign. The fact
Right.
that she was willing to get out there to learn and just be there to help and wasn't just like, okay, you go do it and make sure we make some money. She was fully on board with all of it. She trusted me from day one. I think she had seen that I was out doing side jobs and trying to do something. So that helped, build the trust that I was going to put my best foot forward. And she was right there with me. But today she does handle some customer relation stuff, and she's went with me to the expo several times. In fact, I think she was probably the person that found you, and then
Oh,
I
wow.
can't remember exactly, but I think she was the first. She talked to you before I did. But then,
Okay.
yeah, we come back around, met you, and then a couple years later, we finally started working with you on our digital marketing and our website. And the rest is kind of history. But she's still involved a little bit here and there, helps where she can.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed checking in with you those first couple years when you were just getting started. That's part of why I had you on the podcast. It's pretty scary to start, and I don't know about you. I feel like the first 50,000 revenues the toughest, and it's kind of people getting through that process. It's no small feat. It's pretty impressive.
Right. Yeah, I mean, luckily, since I had worked in the commercial landscape business for a few years after I left the golf business, I had contacts and I was running the chemical department where I left. So when I left, he had hired somebody to replace me, but I don't know that they had all the people in place that they needed when I left. So that first year, he subcontracted me a decent amount of chemical work, which was a huge boon to me getting started. It was $25,000, $30,000 worth of work in the summer, not long after I started. So that was a huge boon to me. And that first season, of end of the first season, I had to go out and buy a snowplow and a salt spreader. Yeah, financing some of the landscape equipment is actually difficult to get financed. So having to pay cash for 13, it was about fourteen thousand
Well,
dollars worth of
yeah,
equipment. That's It was
yeah.
difficult.
So yeah, you've made some sacrifices, and let's talk about that. So you traded nearly paid off Camaro for a 3/4 ton truck to get started. What was going through your head when you made that call?
So the job I had in the landscape business, I had a company truck, and I used it to do a little bit of side work, which luckily they were sort of okay with it. Maybe in retrospect they weren't as okay with it as they should have been, but maybe I should have clarified that with them a little bit more. But anyway, I was doing little jobs here and there to do some stuff on the side. And then once I left, I was like, that truck I had was amazing. I've got to have that. I'm going to take at least that to do what I need to do. A
Right.
half ton truck just isn't going to cut it when you're going to go plowing snow. I mean, not that you can definitely plow snow with a half ton truck, but you go pulling around a dump trailer that's got 12,000 pounds in it. That doesn't, half ton truck doesn't work out very well. You're loading that thing down
Right.
with gravel. You really need a heavy duty truck. And honestly, a 3/4 ton truck really isn't that much more than a half ton truck. It's just a little bit less comfortable to ride around in. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I took all the equity from that nearly paid off Camaro and rolled it into a 3/4 ton truck, and it'll be paid off in like about a year now.
Cool. Cool.
I'm looking
Well,
forward
and
to that
then,
day.
yeah, I bet. I bet. Yeah, it kind of related to that. You were close to 6,000 a month in overhead before you bought a single drop of gas or got paid for a single hour of labor. Walk us through how you were thinking about pricing evolved when you started to now.
Yeah. So when I started, I was just like, well, everybody's charging. Everybody that's been in business is charging $60 or $70 an hour, and I thought it seems like a lot of money to charge somebody $60 an hour when you're used to making a salary of somewhere around $50,000 a year, which is about $25 an hour. You really don't get the scope of how quickly your overhead starts to add up. Truck payments. Now I have two truck payments. I have a mini skid steer, a stand-on machine. You have mowers, liability insurance, workman's comp insurance, commercial vehicle insurance. I count advertising and a few other things into my fixed overhead. Quickly get to about $6,000 a month. And if you got,
Oh,
you
well, like everybody's got their hand out, right?
yeah, exactly. Everybody wants to sell you some kind of service, and some of them you really need. I mean, you're not going to get there without a
Right.
lot of them.
Right.
Maybe I didn't have to have the skid steer, but it sure makes moving gravel a lot more efficient. Maybe I didn't
Right.
need two trucks. I didn't have two trucks at the beginning, but eventually took on a second truck. And but if you think about it, if you're paying a guy $25 an hour to work for you, you got two of them, and they're
Right.
working 30 hours a week. If they're on site 80% on a site 80% of the time that you're out in the field, and you've got $6,000 a month in overhead, and I've spent about $1,500 a month in fuel, depending on where gas prices are at. That's about $14,000 a month that goes out, and you've got about what's that? Somewhere around 160 hours that you're going to be on site. I think that comes out somewhere around $75 an hour, and that you haven't made a.
Right.
That's not making a profit. That's just to break even.
That's just breaking even, right?
Yeah. So if your hourly isn't somewhere close to $90 an hour, now depending on how your overhead's set up, sure you could be a little more efficient, and that's why being efficient is important. Making sure that you're using your equipment as efficiently as possible. You don't have stuff just sitting around that you don't really need. But yeah, you got to get that price up there because you're going to need that stuff to grow. You need something to move stone around because if you're almost 50, like I'm going to be this year, shoving a wheelbarrow around all the time is not fun.
Yeah. Well, so I think I've told you I surf a lot of like the Facebook groups and things for people starting out landscaping businesses. Some guys are literally charging not even a fourth of the 90 that you're saying you should charge. And can you kind of make the case a little more? Because a lot of these guys listening who are thinking about starting or have just started, they're like charging like half that,
Right.
if that.
Two things that kind of jump out to me. Number one, people wouldn't hire you if they could go out and do it themselves. So number one, they don't want to do it themselves. And two, like I said, like I just broke down to, if you're doing it legitimately, you have a lot of overhead. If you come from working a normal job and you think of your vehicle as something that gets you back and forth to work, and it's an expense that you have to incur just, as a person, you don't really think of, okay, that needs to be included in how I price jobs because you could have went from a vehicle that could literally get you back and forth to work as a used front wheel drive car that you bought for $5,000 or less and
Right.
will probably run you for a long time very reliably. That's not going to
Right.
do it. That's not going to do it when you start hauling mulch and stone and hauling away debris and all this other stuff and pulling around mower trailers. Like That's not going to cut it. So, you need to price that equipment that you're purchasing into that needs to be included in the hourly that you're charging.
And then you need to have, I call it screw up money, but things do go wrong. So you've got to have
Yeah, and then you got
a
to make it,
buffer.
and you got to make it through the winter. You got a winter season. If you live in an area that doesn't have snow but has a slow landscape season, you've got to have enough money to pay all that insurance and vehicle payments through the winter. So it just quickly adds up to a number much bigger than you think it does.
And you kind of need to make a profit for it to be worth doing.
There's no reason to, if you could just make the same amount of money working for somebody else, like it's a lot less headache to work for somebody else. There's no reason to go off on your own to make less than you would working for somebody else.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. And, the crazy thing is I know of small business owners that not only are not making what they could make when they're working for somebody else, they're making less than that. And I think it's important to understand, like, if you can't make a profit doing this, and a lot of people are doing really well, it's not worth doing.
Yeah, for sure. There's just so many moving parts and so many things that it's just going to be inconsistent. Like I said, 30 hours a week. But that's why it's like I go back to the efficiency thing. You get that to where you have a crew and they're working 40 hours a week, you can charge a little bit less. So, the whole concept of economies of scale starts to apply when you can start dividing that overhead across more people and being more efficient. That's why efficiency is such a big part of business.
Absolutely.
But and also people think they need to go out and spend a bunch of money to get started. They don't necessarily need to spend a bunch of money. You need some kind of pickup truck and you need some hand tools. People you need to go out and buy this zero turn commercial mower and all the high end stuff. Start with the lowest hanging fruit. And to me, the lowest hanging fruit is start trimming bushes, cleaning up mulch beds. Those are the things that there's a lot of people that mow that don't touch the landscape because they're scared of it. They're scared of trimming somebody's bushes and messing stuff up,
Right.
spraying weed killer and mulch beds, which you need a pesticide license for. So that's probably not where you want to start. But you can start by pulling that stuff by hand, cutting it down and digging it out. You know, that's where to start. And people will gladly pay you $50 an hour to do that as long as you're. I don't charge anybody by the hour. We don't show up and charge anybody by the hour. People get a price ahead of time that they've agreed to, and then we go from there. But they can approve it or not approve it. But if you're basing it on $50 an hour and you don't have a lot of overhead, you're kind of doing it on the side. It's a great way to get your feet wet, get started, figure out how long it takes. Okay, I've got all this debris I've removed. Now how do I get rid of it? Figuring out all these little steps. It's a lot of friction that when you're first starting out can seem overwhelming. Maybe your city picks up compost bags and doesn't charge you. You can lay them out by the street, or sometimes there's local yards that will take it for free. Some municipalities have places that you can dump organic debris for free. Like you can look into those things and get all those things figured out and slowly grow it from there. And
So it's not even just learning the process, but it's kind of learning all the little angles and tricks for your area.
right. And I know for me, when I started, before I went out on my own, I was getting leads off of Nextdoor. It was a great spot where people were just looking for a local person that wasn't necessarily a business, somebody that could just, that they know they're going to get a better deal just dealing with a guy that doesn't have all the overhead that a business has. And
So, like for the first couple of years, you had no website, you just had a Google business profile, and you did newspaper ads and Facebook for your marketing. Sounds like you did a little Nextdoor as well. Kind of what was working and where were you hitting a growth ceiling with that?
yeah, definitely the leads that you're going to want as you start to grow into a more mature business are going to be different than what you're going to want as somebody that's doing a little work on the side and trying to just make a little extra money, or if your intention is to grow it into something bigger than that, then it changes a little bit. But For me, Facebook definitely landed some pretty good jobs over the years, though it's just not as consistent. The newspaper landed us a lot of a slightly older clientele that was more interested in just mowing and smaller services. And until we started with you, we didn't really land the clientele that I was really looking for, which was the commercial maintenance jobs and that kind of
Right.
thing.
And I guess, I think everybody, when they're starting, you've got to get the experience. And your customer type is kind of, I think for everyone, it's like if you can fog a mirror, they're a good customer.
Right.
That's how you know
Anybody
what you
that'll pay
don't.
you to do
What?
anything, you'll be like,
That's
okay,
right.
okay,
Yeah.
you want us to
Yeah.
just haul something away from your house? Okay, whatever. We just need money coming in so that we can continue to pay all these vehicle payments and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you tried some things to promote yourself. The newspaper is an inexpensive option these days that a lot of people overlook.
Right.
Uh,
We spend one hundred
I'm
and thirty
glad
five
that you
dollars a
brought it
month.
on.
$135 a
With
month.
$35 a month?
$135 a month.
Okay.
And it runs year
And,
round
and
for us. That's the reason we get that price to run it year round. If we weren't run it year round, I think it was like 185 or so to run it month to
okay.
month. But yeah, and we've had it in there forever. I've thought about taking it out at times, but I still get calls, and sometimes they're good calls. I mean, that's some get. You don't have to land very many jobs at $135 a month to pay for itself.
Well, I was going to say, it's hard to do anything for $135 a month. That's a great deal. And that's kind of why I wanted to bring that out, even though I'm a digital marketing guy, is newspapers used to be a lot more expensive. Now they're pretty cheap. And it's a great way to get started and kind of support yourself while you get a little more momentum going.
Right, for sure. It
Yeah.
helps get your feet wet with low risk. I mean, that's always something you got to be thinking about is how much risk is here.
And I kind of related to that. I mean, again, when you're starting out, you're trying to conserve funds and you've got limited funds to deal with. One of the things you did when you're starting out is you just kind of built a cheap website. Like, how did that work out for you?
Yeah, so our first website literally generated us zero leads. So
Oh, wow.
it was about $1,500, and then when we discontinued business with the company because it wasn't they wanted it was going to be like $1,500 a year, generated like I said generated us no leads. And when we weren't going to continue the following year, they retained the rights to the website. So it basically went down right after that. And that was, yeah, it was like, well, really was kind of disappointing. I saw the opportunity to get a website up and thought, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to be, increase our visibility. We'll get all these leads. And none of that happened because I didn't know the first thing about SEO other than I knew what this term stood for, and that was about
Right.
it.
Right.
Luckily, not.
Well, and I want to caution people, on a couple things. So the model that they have is a website rental model. So you don't ever own the website or the intellectual property. And it's great for the people running that model because people will often just keep paying until they can afford to do something else. But it's not really great for the person doing it.
Yeah,
And
it's not an asset. It's never an asset on your books. It's never like if you were trying to build a business you could sell. You want things that are assets to you, and obviously renting a website is never going to be an asset, and it probably can't be updated the way you want it to be. You can't go in and tweak it and make it better. Maybe you could pay them more money, and they'll make it a little better, but that's not good for you.
right. Well, and I think, one thing to make people aware of whenever you're doing a website or any kind of marketing, you want to be really clear with the company you're dealing with on who owns what. So, like, you want to make sure if they do a free logo for you, do you own that? If they're doing a website, do you own that, or at what point do you own that? And if they're being kind of amorphous, you want to really watch out. And then we talked for a while, and you decided to engage in an optimized website and SEO and local service ads, which I know was like a huge step for you. Kind of, how did it feel initially when you did this?
Oh, yeah, because we kind of tried it before, not only with that company, but with another company that you get to know people and people offer their services. And a lot of times they don't understand the nuance of the landscape industry. I knew it needed to happen, but I was still very reluctant to say, okay, here's 10 plus $1,000, build however, $1,000 a month or whatever, and think, oh, this is what we need to do to grow. And, it's stressful, you like, because it just seems like this black SEO and digital marketing seems like this giant black box that you pour money into and hope something gets spit out the other end. Because that's kind of the way I had felt about it up to that point, and it was just,
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I was like, yeah, I don't,
Well, and you'd had two bad experiences.
yeah, and so I
So
just
thanks for not getting bitter.
right.
So
The reason I think I went, obviously, you had checked in on me and I hadn't given you a dime, and you checked in on me like 4 or 5 times over the course of a couple of years, and just say, hey, how are things going? If you're interested, reach out, and I'd love to do business. And I was just, I wanted to do it, but I needed the business to get to some point where it was financially stable enough that I could add that amount of overhead without feeling it was just gonna drain the business completely. And we'd finally gotten there, and I was just like, well, if I want to step away from being the guy in the field with the mower, and I want to actually grow this to where my guys that work for me can consistently so that they can make more money, so that I can also make more money, I need to be focusing on growing the company like all the time. That has to be my goal. And yeah, sure, I'm going to spend time in the field, but my main goal has to be managing them, growing the business, managing them, growing the business. It's just, and that was not going to happen with the way we were currently marketing. I knew it had to happen, but it was still scary.
yeah, well, and I didn't mind checking in just because, well, one, I really I live for stories like yours. I know that sounds crazy, but I really love hearing about people succeeding in this business. And I think, even when you engage with me, we came up, with this program to kind of help you get started. And, it's been a successful program for us, but I think you were like at 50 to 70,000 revenue, right?
We were a little more than that. We were closer to like 150, but you know,
Oh, you were.
yeah, but still, even after the first year with you, we grew over 50%. We went from about maybe somewhere between I don't remember exactly, but 150 to 175, and we went to 250. So that's about a 50% growth in 1 year. Like you go 50% year over year. It doesn't take very long, but you have to keep everything. You have to keep everything tight. It's easy to grow too fast and not keep everything. You can magnify your mistakes if you're not careful. So that's one thing I've been just focusing on now is making sure we're as efficient as possible with what we have. I did add a chemical tech this year that can take over, doing a lot of my spraying application. Obviously, with the golf course background, that was really the thing I wanted to focus on from day one. But it takes a lot of clientele when you're getting $300 a year from a lot of them. Some of them are obviously way more than that, but you know, it still takes a pretty large clientele if you're just going to be treating lawns to make that the sole thing you do.
Yeah, yeah. And so you've kind of referenced this or alluded to it, but, at what point did you know you had to give control of certain things, and what was the first areas that you let go of?
The first, I don't like to mow. When I worked in the golf business, I liked mowing greens in the morning, and then other than that, I didn't like sitting on a rough mower or any of that other stuff, any of the other mowing. So from day one, but I'm particular about how we mow. So I had a guy working with me who's worked for me with me like shortly after we started the business. Like he was the first guy I hired. Danielle, was working with me, and then I hired this guy a few months in, and from the get go, I started training him to mow, and I knew that was the spot. It was repeatable. You can. It just comes down to a process. You've got to get a process that you're very clear about how to go about executing it, and then you just got to work with them long enough to and give them some ownership in how it's going and trust that they're going to go out and do it. But took me 3 years before I would let them go out on their own, and then finally last year, the year before, like about halfway through the season, I kind of let him and another guy start doing the mowing by themselves, and then last year they were off on their own doing all the mowing. Unless one of them couldn't make it, I would step in and mow, but for the most part, they were mowing, and that freed me up to go do other stuff. I picked up some chemical work on local golf course, and I was using, I could use that time while they're out mowing. I could go do some of that work and then do the sales work and other stuff. And then this year I'm letting go of some of the chemical work, and eventually I have to let go of some of the office work. And
Right. Yeah, a big part of growing is documenting and scaling and learning how to train people.
yeah, and it's hard. I mean,
So,
you try to describe how to do a job to somebody, but inevitably, that first time you explain it, you're like, you struggle with this. Did I explain it properly? Were they not listening? Like, at what point did it break down? Did it break down because I didn't explain it well enough, or did it break down because you didn't train them well enough, and they were kind of out there blind, even though you explained it to them. If they don't really understand what any of that jargon means, then it doesn't mean anything. So it's definitely a learning curve to training people and ensuring that they're understanding what you're saying. And I know, like, as you get into bigger and bigger projects, the handoff between sales and estimating and the crews out like doing like large design build, like there's a lot of points of failure. Having a very clear way you communicate with everybody and being consistent is definitely something you have to document and be consistent with, and that's something I still struggle with.
cool. I've been some masterminds in different groups with guys a lot bigger than you, and I think everybody struggles. So I'm just happy that you're starting it now, because again, I think I've told you I've worked with a lot of guys as they've grown, and where they blow up is when they don't do training and they don't put together SOPs. They just kind of run into this wall, and I've just been happy to see you work through that. Another thing is WorkWave kind of changed their platform. You looked at several of the options and you didn't go with some of the obvious ones that people went with. And I thought this was really interesting. You ended up choosing LMN. Why did you go that route?
So honestly, it was really rather serendipitous. The first year we went down to the expo, my wife and I went, and I was like, I want software to manage a lot of the invoicing. People can pay online. I wanted all those features, and I didn't want to manage it on QuickBooks alone or spreadsheets. It can be done, but I like to procrastinate and I wait till the last minute. And when you're doing that and you're trying to do it in a more difficult way, that just adds more friction and ends up not done, and you're gonna miss out on a lot of stuff. So I went looking for software. Ended up with WorkWave. I actually liked WorkWave. I thought it worked really well for what I needed it to do. I was perfectly content with it. I had no intention of really changing. And then WorkWave became Real Green Light, but the product was exactly the same. It just got bought out. Or actually, WorkWave bought Real Green and then changed the name of the product I was using to Real Green Light. And then they had a higher tiered service, which was just Real Green. So I was like, well, I'll just switch to Real Green. Well, I reached out several times and nobody got back with me. And so I was like, what am I going to do? And it just happened that I don't know if LMN had us down from when we met with them at the expo the year that we decided to go with WorkWave, and they knew it was
That was
coming.
the Food Expo.
Yeah, Equip Expo in
Yeah,
Kentucky, and
right.
maybe they just had us logged as somebody that went with WorkWave, and they reached out as they knew WorkWave was coming to end of life. But anyway, they just reached out, and I demoed their product, Gave WorkWave several more opportunities, reached out to them, and they still didn't do anything, didn't get back with me. So I ended up with LMN. And it's good software.
Cool.
I mean, it doesn't, software can do a whole lot of things. Most people are not using all the features. I know I'm not using all of
Right.
its features. It has different tiers to the where you can do all kinds of accounting stuff, and you can really dial your business in if you really spend some time with it.
Well, you kind of reference that. So, like, LMN changed how you run the business. And I guess what specifically shifted once you had it? And why do you think most small operators aren't using the software anywhere close to its potential?
It has so much like financial transparency. I'm not using it to its fullest for sure, but you nobody, just most people don't even know everything it can do. You learn how to make jobs, schedule jobs, and invoice jobs, and usually that's where most of us end how we use the software. Unless you're a bigger, more enterprise level business, you're gonna have to, you're gonna have to dial into the finances and, you track sales for different sales members, the sales team and stuff. It has all those features. Most people are not using them because they're just not relevant to the size business that they are, but it's there. I mean, it's a great to get into it early, learn how to use it, and then as you grow, you don't have this huge headache of trying to transfer QuickBooks or Jobber. I have very little to no experience with Jobber or any of the more free base. And I don't know that they're free, but I don't have any experience with.
Inexpensive.
Yeah, inexpensive.
Yeah.
Those are gonna just have their limits. So, and something like LMN doesn't, or Aspire or any of those other Boss LMN, which is not the same as LMN. I didn't realize that until I started with this company that they had nothing to do with one another.
Well, and so I guess they're Granium now. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong,
Right?
but
Yeah, it's Granium. That's correct. They
yeah,
still call this part of the software LMN, but it's LMN by Granium.
yeah, yeah. Well, and just so you know, I know of another company that they're actually at about 2.5 million in revenue, and they just started LMN, and essentially it shut them down. Like it didn't put them out of business, but they've had to kind of completely go away from growth just to get it implemented because they waited so long. And so I think it's good that you're doing it early. And from what I understand from what you've said, it sounds like your approach is you're just kind of focusing on the things, the features you need as you need them, and then expanding those features as you grow. Is that kind of the approach?
Yeah, that's yeah, for sure. There's no reason to dig into the weeds that you don't need to understand yet. Focus on the lowest hanging fruit. What's going to make you the most efficient? What's going to make you the biggest return on your dollar? Spend your time there. And as you approach, your crews, like fully getting the maximum amount of production out of the crews you have, then you kind of start to dig into the other stuff because you're going to need to add a second crew. You're going to need to add different maybe a sales guy, an office controller. Then you're going to have to like learn those other roles in the software. But there's no reason to learn how those all work. I mean, you're going to have to do some of that yourself. You're going to have to invoice and do all that stuff. So you'll eventually probably pass that off to a controller, or maybe not. Maybe that's something you want to control yourself. But every piece of the business eventually has to be passed off, and somebody else has to be trained to do it. And one, just for some redundancy, if anything ever happens to you and you need somebody else to do it, like somebody needs to be able to step in and do those things. But
Well, it's kind of seems like tools like LMN give you a framework, and as you scale and you add people, it makes it easier to kind of offload things and get more done.
yeah, and I knew that from coming from the commercial landscape side, the business I work for. When I started, they were still using QuickBooks
Yeah.
at $4 million plus in revenue. They were still using QuickBooks, and they made it work. I mean, I don't know how they made it work. I couldn't have done it, but they worked for them because the owner came up with a process to do it, and he trained the right people to fill the roles, and that's great. But it does limit where you can go, and
Right.
they went to boss MLM in, and it definitely helped them streamline a lot of things. I'm sure it made them more efficient, but it was really expensive software. It's still way more than what I'm paying. So I just went with one that allowed me to some growth potential. Like I wanted to have things in place that as I grew, they would scale with me and allow me to do more than I was currently doing. I always wanted to be set up to do more, but there's a fine line there. You can't carry too much overhead, or just like we were talking about earlier, efficiency and and your overhead and how you price things. It can quickly get out of line where if you're not keeping an eye on all of it, then you're going to be upside down in a hurry.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, it's great that at your size, you're cognizant of that. So you're a poker player. How does that game relate to running a landscaping business?
Yeah, so it's crazy, really. There's so many similarities, but obviously it's a lot different. A lot of things we kind of talked about, processes and focus on the process and not the result. At the end of the day, in business, the result really is what makes the only thing that really matters is you have to make money at the end of the year. And in
Right.
poker, if you're going to play poker for profit, in the long run, what really matters is how much money you make. But if you focus on the process, the money will follow. And same in business. Like, focus on being efficient, understanding where your business is at, and the amount of money that's coming in and the amount of money that's going out, and how to train people. If you focus on all those processes, then you will make money because you'll understand how everything's working. But if your only goal is making money, it's not going to work out for you. It can work
Right.
out for you in the short term, but it doesn't necessarily work out for you in the long term. In poker, like just because you won a particular hand that maybe you won a huge pot doesn't mean that you made the right decisions. And in business, you could land a contract and it could be a very lucrative contract, but if you overbid it and you just happen to get lucky and get the job, that doesn't mean that you actually did it correctly because you may never land that contract again because something is off in your figure. And it's fine to bid high occasionally. If you're landing every job you bid, you're underbidding it. But you just,
Right. Exactly.
but at the same time, bidding it too high is also really expensive. So there's
You
always
got to
a
kind of be in that sweet spot.
right. You gotta understand your numbers and then hope that other people bidding it are understand theirs and aren't just undercutting you just to undercut it and get the work, which sometimes happens. There's nothing you can do about that. And when that happens, you just gotta be like, okay, and you just chalk it up and move on. But another thing I think about is I had this job come along via email. I didn't not a company I'd ever worked with, didn't really know anything about them, and it was a construction job. They were building like a a fast food restaurant or whatever, and they sent me a proposal to do the landscape install once the building and everything was completed. And then was a bunch of sod and quite it wasn't a lot of plants, but it was a decent amount of sod. And they wanted warranty on the sod, and I was like, I like
That's not a bet you're gonna win.
I'm like that's no, I don't like that idea. I'm like, how do I know that they're going to have the irrigation up and working, and is anybody going to be there checking the irrigation? And it wasn't like in my hometown; it was the next town over, so it was 35, 40-minute drive if I wanted to go check on it. And I was like, yeah, no, this doesn't seem like a winning idea. So yeah, sure, you could maybe somehow price that into it. And I was like, and then I got on that company's website and I checked, and it said every excuse you could imagine not to pay their invoice. So then I was like this is going to be a lot of risk for me if I do this job.
Right.
And so I think poker's the same way. Like you can't put all your chips on the no, you can't put all your money on the table at once and think that's going to work out very many times. Like eventually, some mistake's going to happen, and you're not going to have any margin for error. If you do that in business, you're going to be out of business because
Right.
eventually some job's going to
Exactly.
go wrong, and that's not going to end well for you.
Yeah. Well, you got to have the margins, if, because it's not if something's going to go wrong, it's when it's going to go wrong. And then you're right. There's times you need to walk away, and it's for a variety of reasons. Like you can't fix crazy, and You can't fix guys that don't want to pay their bills. But yeah, I think you're right. It's like if you don't manage your risks and walk away, you can get in trouble really fast. Hey, so you've said you're guilty of procrastinating more than you'd like to admit. How do you get yourself back on track when you feel the drag?
So every day I sometimes wonder this, and it's definitely it's cost me jobs in the past. The one thing I kind of think about now is as I've thought about how to train people and how I go about my day, and as I've become a little older and a little wiser, really just like as many things as I can do to remove friction from doing a particular like bidding or designing, like anything I can do to remove friction helps me actually get it done. Because what I really think is, oh, this is going to be such a pain to come up with this quote. There's all these steps. Once you have all the steps kind of already laid out and you have a process for doing it, it's just like I was just talking about. If you're focusing on the process, the results will follow. And by having a process, it helps reduce the friction, and I'm much more likely to get things done. It's the only thing that helps me now is just try to make it as simple as possible. Don't overcomplicate it. And after several years, you probably have a pretty good idea of any process. An LMN helps you build templates, and then once you have that template, you just, you know, tweak it a little bit, add the plant material, change the amount of the area for stone or fabric or edging. Once you kind of have thought about all those in some kind of systematic fashion, it definitely helps me get it done more easily.
Yeah, yeah. And, that makes sense. It's all about process and kind of know what the steps are to get through it. You're 4 years in, you're at 250K. This year, you've got some momentum. You're going for 400 to 500K this season.
I think about three
What are
days.
you going
I
to
think
focus
about
on
three
this
days
year?
ago we actually finished five. We finished our fifth full year,
So this is okay. So you're 5 years. This is your
sixth season.
okay.
We're starting our sixth season this year.
Okay. So you're in year 6 this season. You're going for 4 to 500K. What's going to be your focus this year?
So like I said earlier, I hired a tech to do the chemical applications, and I've got guys that I trust that can do the mowing, and we've picked up some commercial work. So that's really just going to focus on trying to get as much in the commercial world as possible, because that's also where all our snow business is going to be. So I want to build relationships with commercial clients so that we can do snow removal for them and do their green. So we do both sides of it. And so that's the goal, is to let the guys I've hired and trained do what they need to do out in the field. I'll check up on them, make sure they're good, and really just try to ourselves in as front of as many commercial clients as possible. Medical
Yeah,
complexes.
that's
I mean,
great.
medical complexes are a great place for snow removal because they tend to go with the lower trigger points. That's kind of where we're going to be focusing, I think, this year.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. And one thing you told me about commercial is, you've gotten some work from guys that are managing commercial properties that are not in the area just because you show up for commercial on the web, and that you've got some momentum from the commercial accounts you already have. So you're just going to lean into that and just kind of push it forward.
Yep. And we're, this year we're also going to be starting switching some of our stuff over to battery power. So I'm going to try to use that as a selling point. Try to be a little. We can be quieter when we're on properties. We haven't switched our mowers over yet, but we're going to be within the next couple of years. Going to be looking switching the mowers over too. But all our handheld stuff this year is going to battery power. Just I think there's a lot of benefits. I mean, most people still aren't ready for it. A lot of the guys I went into some of the equipment places here in my local town, and I was like, hey, I'm looking for electric handheld equipment, and they're just like, why? And I'm like, I was just so frustrated because I want to, because that's what I want to do.
So are there blower bands in your area, or like have they
Not, yeah, it's not even on.
had any requirements yet?
It's not even on anybody's radar in my area. We're
Okay.
I know in
Well, and
some
and
places that is a big deal, but here that's not. And the blowers are I don't know what I say. Blowers are extremely hard on batteries. So you have to have a lot of battery power to be operating your blowers all day, especially if you're in an area where you're going to have to do like leaf removal in the fall, like running them constantly. We're still going to keep gas powered blowers for certain things like or like leaf removal and leaf cleanup, but we're going to try to reduce our dependency on them as much as possible.
Okay, well that's great. Well, it's surprising. I think earlier in it was harder, but it's like people are having really good experiences
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
with electric.
A lot of people have
And
reduced like employee turnover and a lot of things by going electric. So I'm interested. I'm excited. I like them. They don't vibrate. Your hands don't. It's not like your hands itch after you ran the string trimmer all day. Like string trimmers, they're hard on your hands. I remember when I was 20 years old working at the golf course and mowing yards on the side. I'd go home in the evenings. I'd wake up in the mornings. I'd have trigger finger. My fingers would be locked, and I was only 20 years old. Like that's not good for people to run that kind of stuff all day, every day.
yeah, well, and on the customer side, so of course, I've got a landscaping company managing, my property. And I talked to the owner, we're friends, and he bemoaned having to switch over to electric because, again, I'm in kind of Oregon, the king area as far as environmental and noise pollution, things like that. And it's interesting as he's gotten them, it's been really great. And then as a customer, the other day, I would always kind of wince when people came to do our yard and they were able to do our yard and get in and out of there. And I didn't even realize they'd been there. And so I don't know. I feel like for consumers, once they understand what the difference is, they're gonna really demand it.
I think so as well. That's my thinking, and so we're gonna try it. Battery technology, and there's some battery technology right around the horizon. I think that's gonna hopefully bring that price point down for the entry level because it's still really expensive to get the mowers just because of the amount of battery power you need. But you know, we won't dig too far into tech, but sodium ion batteries and solid state batteries. From my understanding, there's some pretty promising stuff right on the horizon. So if that stuff
Yeah,
makes
I
it
think
in,
it's improving every year.
yeah, for sure.
So you've had this massive learning curve, and after everything you've learned, for somebody just starting out, what insights would you give someone? What would you tell somebody starting out to do?
And I think we kind of touched on this, but don't go try to mow. It's just really competitive. Unless that's just really what you like to do. And mowing's great. I mean, you can make some good extra money mowing, but a lot of times those clients are hard to find, because there's so many people that do some mowing on the side. I think the lowest hanging fruit is trimming bushes and cleaning up weeds out of landscape beds and just doing small odd and end stuff in somebody's landscape. Cutting a bush down, replanting a bush for them or and doing just the maintenance stuff on a landscape and educate yourself
So
on.
don't like do just basic mowing. You want to really start doing things that add real value for people.
Right. So many people mow on their own and either they don't want to trim their bushes, they don't know how to trim their bushes. You can, my guess is you could spend a weekend on YouTube and Google, figure out the common landscape plants in your area and how to trim them, and you're gonna be well ahead of a lot of people. And just go out and execute that, offer that service. You don't need, number one, you don't have to go buy a mower. You don't have to have a trailer. All you need is a truck and you need something to put the clippings in. And if you may even be able to leave them on their curbside, so you may be able to even if you didn't have a truck, if you go to Lowe's and get the compostable bags, you may be able to bag that stuff up and leave it on their curb, and the city will pick it up in a lot of places. If you live in the country, obviously it's a little easier to get rid of your debris if you live in the middle of nowhere like I grew up. But yeah, that's where I would start. That's how I did start really is when I put that ad on next door. I got people that wanted to do just normal maintenance stuff, and that way I didn't have a mower at the time. I had a very small yard in town, so I had a small push mower. I didn't want to go push mow yards. I'd done that. That didn't sound fun to me at all. But taking
Yeah.
somebody's
Yeah.
landscape that's completely overgrown, take a few hours pulling weeds and trimming bushes, and how much difference it makes in how somebody's, the curb appeal of somebody's yard. I think it's pretty significant and pretty satisfying when you turn around and look at it and think, I did that. So that's what I like doing.
Cool. Cool. Well, Mike, thanks for kind of sharing your journey with us. That's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks, Mike, of the Turf Guy, for sharing your story. If you've got something out of this one, share it with somebody in the industry who needs to hear it. We'll see you next time on the Landscape Business Growth Lab. That's a wrap on today's episode of Landscape Business Growth Lab podcast. I hope you picked up some fresh ideas to help your business grow. Remember, growth doesn't happen overnight. It takes the right tools, strategies, and consistent cultivation. If you found value in today's show, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. Share this episode with a fellow green industry professional who's ready to level up. For more resources, show notes, and exclusive content, visit us at landscapebusinessgrowthlab.com. And if you want to connect directly, you can find me at Everbearing Services. Until next time, I'm Ron McCabe, reminding you to keep your tools sharp and your mindset sharper. Now get out there and grow something great.